poor Maid fell in love with a billionaire son. Surprisingly, he loved her back, but when his father found out, he did something shocking to end their bond. You will never imagine what he did. Jonathan Turner was a man who understood the weight of every dollar he earned. His story began far from the towering estate he would one day call home, in a neighborhood where the streets bore cracks from decades of neglect. As a boy, he witnessed his father working double shifts in a factory, his hands calloused and his spirit worn thin. Those images stayed with Jonathan, etched into his mind as a reminder of what he would never become. From those humble beginnings, he carved a path that others deemed impossible. Through sleepless nights and ruthless decisions, he built an empire that dominated markets, industries, and headlines. By 55, he wasn't just wealthy. He was a symbol of power, a man whose mere presence could command respect or fear. Yet for all his achievements, Jonathan's heart grew colder with each rung of the ladder he climbed. To him, life was a meritocracy, and every failure was a reflection of weakness. His world revolved around control, precision, and an unwavering belief that status was the ultimate measure of success. And nothing, no one, could disrupt the order he had created. Not even his own son. Michael Turner, Jonathan's only child, had inherited his father's sharp intellect but none of his unyielding ambition. From the outside, Michael seemed to have it all. Access to the finest education, a future secured by his family's wealth, and a name that opened doors most could only dream of. But beneath the polished exterior was a young man searching for purpose. He excelled in school not because he wanted to, but because it was expected. He attended corporate meetings not out of interest, but out of duty. The truth was, Michael's heart longed for a different kind of life, one where he could make his own choices, pursue his own passions, and be loved for who he was, not for the legacy he represented. And then there was Lila. Her story was one of quiet determination. Born to a struggling single mother who worked as a housekeeper, Lila's childhood was filled with lessons in resilience. There were days when she would accompany her mother to work, watching as she scrubbed floors and washed windows in homes that were worlds apart from their own. It was during those moments that Lila began to dream, not of riches or grandeur, but of a voice that could inspire others. She sang to herself at night, her melodies filling the cramped room she shared with her mother. But life had little patience for dreams. Bills needed paying, and opportunities were scarce for someone like her. By the time she turned 18, Lila had taken up her mother's work, becoming a maid in the Turner household, a position that paid well enough to keep her hopes alive, but just barely. It was within the sprawling halls of the Turner estate, surrounded by luxury beyond imagination, that their paths intertwined. Michael first noticed Lila during a rare moment of reprieve, as she carried a tray through the garden. There was a quiet grace to her movements, a spark in her eyes that caught him off guard. Lila, on the other hand, had always seen Michael from afar, assuming he was just another heir born into privilege. But as their conversations grew more frequent, she saw a different side of him, a man who felt trapped in his own life, longing for something genuine. For Jonathan, the very idea of Lila and Michael was unthinkable. To him, Lila was invisible, a worker performing her duties within the boundaries he had set. Michael, on the other hand, was the heir to everything Jonathan had built, a legacy that demanded focus, strength, and, above all, loyalty to the family name. When he began to notice the growing connection between his son and the maid, his disapproval turned to quiet fury. He saw it as a betrayal of everything he had worked for, a threat to the order he had meticulously maintained. And yet, what Jonathan failed to understand was that his son had already begun to step away from the life he envisioned. For Michael, Lila represented the kind of love his father would never comprehend, a love untainted by wealth or expectations. And for Lila, Michael was proof that someone could see beyond her uniform, beyond the hardships she carried. But this was no fairy tale. The gap between their worlds was vast, and the stakes were higher than either of them could have imagined. In Jonathan's eyes, their love was an affront, a challenge to the very principles that defined his existence. The battle lines were drawn, not in public, but in the quiet moments of disdain, the clipped conversations, and the icy glares that filled the Turner household. What neither Michael nor Lila knew was that the choice they were about to make would not only change their lives but would ripple through time, shaking the foundations of everything Jonathan believed. In a world where power and love rarely coexist, two hearts dared to defy the rules. What happens when ambition collides with emotion? When pride blinds a man to what truly matters? And when love, against all odds, refuses to back down? This is their story, a story of rejection, resilience, and a journey that would transform them all. Michael Turner and Lila's bond began quietly, unnoticed by most, hidden in the everyday rhythm of life at the Turner estate. What started as stolen conversations in the garden soon grew into something deeper. They would meet in the early mornings, before the household stirred, sharing their dreams under the soft light of dawn. Michael spoke of wanting to live a life that mattered, not in terms of wealth, but in creating something real. Lila, in turn, shared her longing to sing, to let her voice carry the emotions she had spent years suppressing. In those moments, they weren't the billionaire's son and the maid. They were just two people who saw the world differently but found something unshakable in each other. Jonathan Turner, however, saw everything. He always did. It was his nature to observe, to control. At first, he dismissed their connection as harmless, a passing infatuation that Michael would soon abandon. But when he walked into his study one evening and saw his son laughing with Lila in a way that spoke of something much more profound, his patience snapped. That night, he called Michael into his study, where the conversation began with icy calm but quickly escalated into a storm. "This ends now," Jonathan commanded, his voice cutting through the air. "You have a responsibility to this family, to this legacy. What you're doing is reckless, and frankly, beneath you." Michael, standing tall but visibly shaken, replied, "Lila is not beneath me. She's the one person who makes me feel alive. You wouldn't understand that because all you care about is your empire." The words struck Jonathan like a blow, not because they weren't true, but because they came from the son he had molded in his own image. His anger boiled over. "If you walk out of this house with her," he thundered, "then you are no longer my son. You'll have nothing. No money, no support. Do you understand me?" Michael looked at his father, the man he had spent his entire life trying to please, and realized that nothing he did would ever be enough. With tears in his eyes but resolve in his heart, he turned and left. Jonathan watched as his son walked out the door, leaving behind not just a home but an entire life. And with that, Michael Turner was disowned. The days that followed were some of the hardest Michael and Lila had ever faced. They moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a part of the city that couldn't have been further from the grandeur of the Turner estate. The first month was spent piecing together odd jobs, stretching every dollar, and learning to live with far less than they had ever imagined. There were nights when they shared a single meal, their stomachs growling but their spirits unbroken. One night, as they sat together on a worn couch, Lila broke the silence. "Michael," she began, her voice trembling, "I can't help but feel this is all my fault. You've lost everything because of me." Michael turned to her, his eyes full of love and determination. "Lila, you are everything. I didn't lose anything that mattered. I found you." His words carried a conviction that rekindled her hope, even as doubt continued to linger in the back of her mind. Despite their hardships, Michael never stopped believing in Lila's talent. He convinced her to sing at a small community event, where her voice silenced the room and brought tears to the eyes of strangers. That night, a local music producer approached her with an offer to record a demo. It wasn't much, a single opportunity, but it was a spark. With Michael by her side, Lila began to chase the dream she had once thought impossible. Word of Lila's voice began to spread. Local gigs turned into invitations to perform at larger venues. Each performance brought her one step closer to the dream she had carried since childhood. But the journey was not without its challenges. The strain of balancing auditions, part-time jobs, and their dwindling finances tested them both. There were nights when Lila sat alone, questioning whether the sacrifices were worth it, whether Michael deserved more than she could ever give him. Michael, however, refused to waver. He worked tirelessly, taking on double shifts, researching every opportunity, and standing firm in his belief that their struggles would one day lead to something extraordinary. "Lila," he would say, "your voice isn't just your dream, it's our future." His words carried a weight that kept her going, even in the darkest moments. Then came the breakthrough. A talent scout from a major label attended one of her performances and saw in her what Michael had always known, that her voice was special. He offered her a meeting that could change everything. As Lila stood backstage that night, holding Michael's hand, she felt the weight of every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, and every ounce of hope they had carried. They were on the brink of something extraordinary, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Back at the Turner estate, Jonathan heard whispers of Lila's growing success and Michael's determination. He dismissed them at first, unwilling to confront the possibility that his son might thrive without him. But deep down, in the quiet moments when the house fell silent, he felt the first twinges of something unfamiliar: regret. The seeds of change had been planted, though neither he nor his son knew just how much their lives were about to intersect once more. The journey was far from over. Their love had endured rejection, hardship, and doubt, but the greatest tests still lay ahead. How far could they rise, and at what cost? And would the walls that Jonathan had built around his heart ever come down? The turning point began with a phone call, one that changed everything. Lila had been singing at small venues, pouring her heart into every note, when a stranger from the audience handed her a business card. At first, she hesitated. They had seen their share of empty promises and false hopes, but Michael encouraged her to follow through. "What if this is the one?" he said, his voice steady even though their circumstances were anything but. That stranger turned out to be a talent scout working for one of the biggest music producers in the country. He invited Lila to audition, calling her voice something the world needs to hear. It was an opportunity too big to ignore. But with that opportunity came an impossible choice. The trip to the producer's studio was hours away, and they didn't have the money for travel, let alone the professional wardrobe Lila would need to make the right impression. Michael, without hesitation, emptied the last of their savings, money they had been holding on to for rent and groceries. "We'll figure it out," he told her. "This is your moment." Despite her protests, Michael insisted. He believed in her dream more than she believed in herself. When they arrived at the studio, the atmosphere was unlike anything Lila had ever experienced. The walls were lined with gold records, photographs of artists whose voices had shaped generations. It was intimidating, but Michael stood by her side, his quiet strength giving her the courage she needed. When Lila stepped into the recording booth, it was as if the world outside disappeared. She sang with everything she had, her voice raw with emotion, drawing from years of struggle and hope. The producer sat in silence, his expression unreadable, until she finished. Then, with a single nod, he said, "You've got it." That moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. The next few months were a whirlwind. Lila recorded her first single, a song that told the story of love, sacrifice, and perseverance. When it was released, it resonated with listeners in a way no one had anticipated. Within weeks, it went viral, climbing the charts and earning her a place in the national spotlight. Suddenly, the woman who had once scrubbed floors was performing on stages she had only dreamed of, her name spoken in rooms that had once seemed out of reach. While Lila's star was rising, Michael found himself stepping into a new role, not just as her supporter, but as a visionary in his own right. Inspired by the hardships they had faced, he began developing innovative technology designed to make life easier for people like them. Those who had to stretch every dollar, those who knew what it meant to start from nothing. What began as a small project quickly gained traction, drawing investors and attention from industry leaders. Within a year, Michael had built a company that was changing lives, proving that success didn't have to come at the cost of integrity. And then there was Jonathan. From his place of wealth and power, he watched it all unfold. Lila's meteoric rise, Michael's growing influence. At first, he dismissed it, chalking it up to luck or temporary success. But as the weeks turned into months and the headlines continued to feature their names, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Lila's voice was everywhere, a constant reminder of the woman he had once dismissed as insignificant. Michael's name was now associated with innovation and leadership, not as the heir to the Turner Empire, but as a self-made man. For the first time, Jonathan felt something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just pride or admiration, it was regret. He began to question the choices he had made, the words he had spoken in anger. Late at night, in the quiet of his mansion, he would replay that fateful moment in his mind. The ultimatum he had given his son, the door slamming shut as Michael walked away. He told himself it was too late, that his pride wouldn't allow him to reach out. But in his heart, he wondered if he had made a mistake that could never be undone. As Lila's fame grew and Michael's empire expanded, the distance between them and Jonathan felt both physical and emotional. Yet their lives were more intertwined than any of them realized. Lila, in interviews, spoke openly about the man who had stood by her through every hardship, never once mentioning the estrangement from his family. Michael, in turn, avoided talking about his past, focusing instead on the future they were building together. And Jonathan? He remained a silent observer, caught between the pride that had defined his life and the growing realization that it had cost him more than he was willing to admit. The turning point was complete. Lila was no longer just a dreamer. She was a star. Michael was no longer just a son. He was a leader. And Jonathan, for the first time in his life, was no longer in control. But the story was far from over. The choices they had made had set the stage for a confrontation that would test them all. A reckoning where love, forgiveness, and pride would collide. The question now was not just whether Jonathan would reach out, but whether it was too late for Michael and Lila to let him back in. It was a night Lila would never forget. The theater was packed, its grand chandeliers casting a golden glow over a sea of eager faces. This wasn't just any performance. This was the night she was to receive one of the highest honors in the music industry, a recognition not only of her talent but of her journey. As she walked onto the stage, dressed in elegance that contrasted sharply with her humble beginnings, the applause was thunderous. Yet, beneath the glamour and celebration, her heart was heavy with memories of struggle, sacrifice, and the love that had brought her to this moment. Standing at the podium, holding the gleaming award, Lila took a deep breath. Her voice trembled slightly as she began. "This moment isn't just mine," she said, her gaze searching the crowd. "It belongs to someone who believed in me when no one else did. Someone who gave up everything so that I could chase a dream that felt impossible. Michael, this is for you." The audience erupted in applause, but Lila's voice didn't waver as she continued. "But tonight is also bittersweet, because while I stand here, there's a part of my life that feels incomplete. Sometimes, success can't erase the pain of what was lost along the way." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion, touching the hearts of everyone present. Jonathan Turner watched the broadcast from the solitude of his study, the words cutting deeper than he expected. He had avoided watching her performances for so long, unable to reconcile his pride with the reality of her success. But tonight, something was different. Lila's voice wasn't just a melody. It was a story, one that he had played a role in, whether he wanted to admit it or not. Her speech pierced through the walls he had built around himself. For the first time, he saw not just a maid who had risen to fame, but a woman who had shown his son the kind of love and loyalty he had never been able to offer. And with that realization came a decision. Jonathan knew he couldn't remain on the sidelines any longer. That night, he called his driver and instructed him to head to the venue where Lila was performing at a post-award gala. The city lights blurred outside the car window as he sat in silence, his mind racing. What would he say? Could he even find the words? Pride and regret fought for control as he gripped the seat, the weight of his choices pressing down on him like never before. Backstage, Michael was waiting for Lila, his heart swelling with pride. He had watched her speech from the wings, his chest tight with emotions he rarely let himself feel. But before he could join her, he heard a voice behind him. A voice he hadn't heard in years. "Michael!" He turned, and there he was, Jonathan Turner, standing just a few feet away, looking smaller somehow, as though the years had worn him down in ways that money could not fix. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. "What are you doing here?" Michael finally asked, his voice sharp but controlled. Jonathan hesitated, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I came to see Lila," he said, but his eyes betrayed him. He was here for more than that, and Michael knew it. "You've been watching from the sidelines all this time," Michael said, his tone hardening. "But now that she's famous, now that we've made it, you decide to show up? Where were you when we had nothing? When we were scraping by, living off scraps, trying to survive?" Each word landed like a blow, the pain that Michael had carried for years spilling out in raw, unfiltered honesty. Jonathan's face tightened, his jaw working as he struggled to find the words. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice low. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought you needed to learn how to survive on your own." Michael's laugh was bitter, filled with years of pent-up anger. "You didn't protect me. You abandoned me. You threw me away because I chose love over your expectations." The words hung in the air, each one cutting into Jonathan like shards of glass. He wanted to respond, to defend himself, but he knew Michael was right. There was no justification for what he had done. "I was wrong," Jonathan finally said, his voice breaking. "I was wrong, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'm here now, and I want to try. I want to be part of your life again. If you'll let me." It wasn't an apology in the traditional sense, but it was the closest Jonathan had ever come. For a man who had built his entire life on control and power, admitting his mistakes felt like standing bare before the world. Michael's expression softened, but only slightly. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice quieter now. "You don't just get to walk back in and pretend everything is fine. You hurt me. You hurt us." Jonathan nodded, his head bowed. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, if you'll let me." The vulnerability in his voice was something Michael had never heard before. For the first time, he saw not the powerful billionaire, but a father, a flawed, broken man trying to find his way back. As the conversation ended, there was no grand resolution, no dramatic embrace. But there was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had stood between them for so long. Michael didn't forgive Jonathan that night, but he didn't send him away either. And for Jonathan, that was enough. It was a first step, one that would lead them all into uncharted territory, a journey of healing, reconciliation, and the hope that love could mend even the deepest wounds. It was a quiet afternoon when the knock came at the door. Michael and Lila were sitting in their modest yet comfortable home, the kind of space they had built together, a reflection of their hard work, dreams, and the life they had carved out despite everything. Lila, humming softly as she prepared tea, paused and looked toward Michael. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, his heart stopped for a moment. Standing there, shoulders hunched slightly, was Jonathan Turner. The man who had once towered over boardrooms and commanded empires now stood on his son's doorstep, not as the billionaire Michael had grown up fearing, but as a father stripped of all pretense. His face carried the lines of regret, his eyes heavy with unspoken words. Michael hesitated, his instinct to close the door fighting against the flicker of curiosity and perhaps hope in his heart. "May I come in?" Jonathan asked, his voice quieter than Michael remembered, almost unsteady. After a moment that felt like a lifetime, Michael stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Lila appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, her expression unreadable as she took in the sight of Jonathan Turner standing in their home. She placed the tea tray down carefully, her movements deliberate, as though steadying herself for what was to come. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Jonathan glanced around, his eyes lingering on the small details, the framed photos of Lila and Michael, the awards on the shelf, the signs of a life he had never been a part of. He cleared his throat, but his words didn't come easily. "I know I shouldn't be here unannounced," he began, his hands gripping the back of a chair for support. "But I couldn't stay away any longer. I've been watching from afar, seeing everything you've accomplished. And I've realized how wrong I was." His voice cracked slightly, and he looked at Michael, his gaze earnest. "I made mistakes. I let my pride, my obsession with success blind me to what really mattered. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The words came out rushed, as if he had rehearsed them 1,000 times but still feared they wouldn't be enough. Michael's jaw tightened, his emotions swirling between anger, sorrow, and the faintest glimmer of relief. He crossed his arms, his tone sharp. "Sorry? Do you think an apology can erase everything? The years of silence, the nights we wondered if we'd even make it through the week." Each word landed like a hammer, and Jonathan flinched, but he didn't interrupt. He stood there, absorbing the weight of his son's words, his shoulders sagging further with every syllable. Lila, who had remained silent, stepped forward. Her gaze was steady, her tone gentle but firm. "Michael," she said softly, "he's here. That has to mean something." Her words were simple, but they carried a depth of compassion that had defined her journey. Michael turned to her, his frustration clear. "Lila, after everything, after what he said, what he did, you're asking me to just forgive him?" She placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to see what this moment means. He's trying, Michael. And if there's one thing we've learned, it's that people can change." Her voice was steady, her conviction undeniable. Jonathan's composure finally cracked. Tears filled his eyes as he sank into the chair, his hands trembling. "I thought I was doing what was best," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was teaching you how to be strong, how to survive in a world that shows no mercy. But all I did was push you away. And I see now that the things I built, they mean nothing if I've lost my family. You and Lila, you're everything I should have valued from the start." His voice broke completely, and for the first time in his life, Jonathan Turner cried. Not out of defeat, but out of the overwhelming weight of regret and a desperate hope for forgiveness. Michael stared at his father, his own eyes brimming with tears he refused to let fall. He remembered the years of struggle, the nights filled with anger and hurt. But he also saw the man before him, a man who had been broken down by his own choices, now pleading for a chance to make things right. Slowly, Michael sat down across from him, his voice quieter now. "You can't undo the past," he said. "But maybe we can try to move forward. I don't know how, but we can try." Jonathan looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. He nodded, unable to speak, but the relief in his eyes said everything. Lila, watching the two men, stepped forward, her presence a calming force. "Forgiveness doesn't happen overnight," she said gently. "But it's a start, and sometimes starting is the hardest part." She poured tea for everyone, her movements deliberate, creating a moment of stillness amidst the storm of emotions. As they sat together, the atmosphere shifted, not entirely healed, but lighter, as if a crack had appeared in the wall that had separated them for so long. In the weeks and months that followed, Jonathan returned again and again, not as the imposing figure he once was, but as a father trying to rebuild. He listened more than he spoke, learning from Michael and Lila about the lives they had built, the dreams they had chased, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Slowly, he began to understand that the true measure of wealth was not in the empire he had constructed, but in the resilience of his son and the grace of the woman he had once dismissed. For Jonathan Turner, it was a journey of unlearning, a transformation from a man who valued power above all else to one who finally understood the priceless gift of family. And for Michael and Lila, it was a reminder that love, no matter how tested, could create bridges over even the deepest divides. In the end, it wasn't the words spoken or the actions taken that mattered most. It was the willingness to try, to hope, and to believe in the possibility of something new. As the dust settled on their lives, the journey of Michael, Lila, and Jonathan Turner revealed a truth that resonates far beyond the confines of their story. It is a truth about love and ambition, about the scars we carry and the strength it takes to heal them. In the end, their story wasn't just about the wealth that separated them or the dreams that lifted them. It was about the courage to bridge a chasm forged by pride, rejection, and years of silence. Michael and Lila's love had been tested in ways few could imagine. It had endured poverty, judgment, and the weight of expectations that tried to crush it. Together, they built a life that wasn't defined by material success, but by the resilience that came from knowing they had chosen each other when the world demanded otherwise. Their ambition wasn't about proving something to others. It was about honoring the belief they had in themselves and each other. And in doing so, they created something extraordinary. A love story that didn't just survive adversity, but grew because of it. Then there was Jonathan, a man who had spent a lifetime chasing power, only to find it empty when the people who mattered most were no longer by his side. His journey was one of unlearning, of realizing that the empires we build mean nothing if they leave us alone at the top. It wasn't an easy road for him. Admitting his mistakes took more strength than all the business deals he had ever negotiated. Asking for forgiveness required more humility than he had ever known. And learning to listen, to truly hear the voices of his son and the woman he had once dismissed, was his greatest triumph. In their reconciliation, there was no erasing the past, no perfect resolution tied up neatly with a bow. Instead, there was something far more real, a willingness to try, to rebuild, and to move forward together. Jonathan's transformation was a testament to the idea that it's never too late to change. And Michael's forgiveness wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the ultimate act of strength. As for Lila, her compassion was the thread that held them all together, a reminder that grace often paves the way for redemption. Their story leaves us with a question, one that echoes far beyond the walls of their home. What would you do if you had to choose between family and the one you love? Michael and Lila faced that choice, and though the path they walked was anything but easy, it led them to a place of healing and hope. But for many, that decision remains an unanswered riddle, shaped by circumstance, emotion, and the complexities of the human heart. Perhaps the most powerful message of their journey is this: forgiveness is not a destination but a process, a choice we make each day to let go of anger and embrace possibility. It asks us to see beyond the pain of the past, to recognize the humanity in those who have wronged us, and to believe that even the deepest wounds can heal. It's a lesson Jonathan learned too late for some, but just in time for the people who mattered most. Love and ambition, two forces often seen as opposites, proved to be the very foundation of their transformation. Love gave them the strength to endure, and ambition gave them the drive to rise above the limitations placed on them. Together, they overcame the scars of rejection, proving that no divide is too wide for a bridge built with understanding, resilience, and faith in what could be. Now their story becomes yours to ponder. What would you do if faced with the choices they had to make? Would you have the courage to forgive, to rebuild, to love beyond what seems possible? Is forgiveness truly the greatest lesson of all? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Your reflections, your own stories and insights mean so much to us and to everyone in our community. Because in the end, it is our shared humanity that binds us all. Michael, Lila, and Jonathan taught us that healing is possible, that love can endure, and that even the hardest hearts can find redemption. And perhaps, just perhaps, their journey is a reminder that no matter how far apart we may find ourselves, there is always a way back. If you enjoyed this story of love, resilience, and redemption, and you want more emotional stories with powerful twists, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit that bell icon so you'll never miss a new release from Soulful Twists. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, move, and remind us of the strength within us all. Thank you for watching and for being part of our journey. Until next time, take care, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next story.